about to listen to the Dr. Dahlia Show. Sassy, stimulating medical talk radio. Any medical advice Dr. Dahlia Wax gives on her show should not be substituted for an actual visit to your medical provider. And now, here's Dr. Dahlia.
All right, welcome back to the Dr. Dahlia Show, 1-877-DOC-DALI, 1-877-DOC-DALI. We got a lot to get to today, and we have some updates on the ceasefire with Iran. But, you know, this story broke my heart. Terry Crews, love Terry Crews, America's Got Talent, White Chicks. His wife has been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And what really bothers me about what happened is it took 3 years for them to diagnose her. She had some numbness in her left foot. Then she began to have some shaking in her hand. And apparently her medical provider said it was anxiety, blew it off. She's been battling Parkinson's for a while, and Parkinson's affects more than 1 million people in the United States. Well, joining us today is Robert Beatty, who is living with Parkinson's, and John Lear, president and CEO of the Parkinson's Foundation. Welcome back, John. Welcome, Robert. So glad to have you. John, let's start with you, and I'm so grateful for you coming back onto the show. Talk to us about Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. So, as your listeners may know, Parkinson's is a progressive, degenerative neurological disorder that affects how the brain controls movement in the body. As you mentioned at the top, it's, so Terry Crews' wife is, I think, 60 years old. So she's in the age range when people begin developing Parkinson's disease. It's typically a disease of later in life. And the challenge she had with getting diagnosed are common. People will often live with the symptoms for several years without being diagnosed properly or being diagnosed at all. So we see that over and over again. So that's why we think it's so important for people who have any of the signs or symptoms, and Robert will talk about his, to go see your physician.
Yeah. John, expand on some of the basics that we want our listeners to know and recognize as it pertains to Parkinson's.
Yeah, so Parkinson's disease typically it's characterized as a movement disorder. So people will often have challenges with moving, with walking, with transferring, with balance. They will often start with a resting tremor, a little bit of hand shaking or shaking in the foot. But Parkinson's also has what we call non-motor symptoms that affect people just, often as much. And those can be cognitive issues, mental health issues, digestive issues, trouble with sleeping, loss of a sense of smell. Again, we say no two people have the same course of disease. So while some people will have some of those symptoms, others may not. And some of the early signs are like loss of sense of smell, some stiffness, small handwriting. When you have any of those combined with maybe, let's say, a little bit of a tremor, we really strongly encourage people to go to see a physician, a clinician, and in particular a neurologist, because a neurologist is going to see those symptoms and probably make some other determinations than maybe a primary care physician. But the key is go see a doctor as soon as possible.
Amen to that. Robert, I'm so glad you're on the show. I know you have another interview next, but talk to us, if you don't mind, quickly about some of the symptoms that you had.
Absolutely. Well, like Rebecca Cruz, I chased my symptoms for 2.5 years before I was diagnosed. My primary care physician said I should chalk it up to being older and growing old. And that frustrated me because I knew my body so well. I knew something was going wrong. And like John had mentioned, majority of my symptoms were non-motor symptoms at that time. Loss of sense of smell. I had problems with some balance where I'd trip over, the carpet in the house. And I think, gosh, what's going on? And it wasn't until I pushed and became my own advocate that I got the diagnosis. As far as managing my symptoms, managing my Parkinson's has been about taking an active role in my health from the very beginning. When I was diagnosed, I immediately decided I was not going to allow my stress or the disease with Parkinson's to define my outlook or my quality of life. I chose an optimistic mindset, anchored it in my faith, and assembled a strong care team and developed a comprehensive exercise plan that together would address my physical, emotional, spiritual needs. And it's paid off.
Love it. Love it. Wow. John, what resources can my listeners get in terms of help?
Yeah, so we encourage people to go to our website, parkinson.org, or call our helpline, which is staffed by experts in Parkinson's care, at 1-800-4PD-INFO.
Wonderful. Well, gosh, I know you guys are rushing. Thank you. I really, really appreciate you being here. Can't wait to have you back. And God bless you for spreading the word of this important neurological disease. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
1-877-Dr. Dolly, 1-877-DOCDALI. Symptoms of Parkinson's, as they had suggested, you'll get stiffness and rigidity. You could lose your balance. This pill rolling tremor where it looks like you're playing with a pill in your fingers. We call it a pill rolling tremor, which is pretty common with Parkinson's. Your movement will slow down because you're worried about your balance and your coordination. Sometimes you'll have an inability to move. Your gait will provide shuffling steps where you don't have a nice full stride. You start to shuffle. And then, unfortunately, patients with Parkinson's, like we saw with Robin Williams, can have depression, anxiety, memory loss, constipation. As Robert brought up, decreased ability to smell, difficulty swallowing, erectile dysfunction, pneumonia. You could get fractures from falling. Some people with severe cases could get hallucinations, delusions, and dementia. Men appear to be affected more than women at twice the rate, but it could affect anybody. Average onset about 60. Early onset could happen before the age of 50, like we saw with Michael J. Fox. We do have medications and we do have treatments out there. But when you look at Michael J. Fox, Janet Reno, Muhammad Ali, Casey Kasem, Johnny Cash, Linda Ronstadt, Pope John Paul II, Reverend Jesse Jackson had Parkinson's, Neil Diamond, Ozzy Osbourne, Colin Powell. They even think Adolf Hitler had Parkinson's. 1-877-Doc Dolly. Don't go away. Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Dahlia. As many of you know, I lost another colleague to suicide. And tragically, tens of thousands of Americans, including hundreds of physicians, take their lives each year. Why is suicide so common? Why doctors? Even medical students have alarming suicide rates. Nurse burnout is at an all-time high. Maybe it's the monstrous workloads we face every day. Maybe it's because of burnout, malpractice suits, online reviews. Medicine has changed so rapidly that it's almost unrecognizable to those of us who entered this field and wanted to take it by storm. But there's not a lot of resources out there for healthcare providers who deny that they are struggling or at risk. So my book, The Depressed Doctor, aims to change that for both the physician and medical student and anyone else who is struggling. Find The Depressed Doctor on Amazon or at drdahlia.com. And if you are currently struggling, call or text 988, the National Suicide Prevention and Crisis Hotline. Don't wait. The silence is killing us.
Hi, it's Mark Falter, host of the Financial Fitness Show. I strongly believe that no one should ever pay 1 penny more in taxes than they are legally obligated. Unfortunately, for most hardworking Americans, this just isn't the case. Why? Because most people spend more time planning next weekend's getaway than trying to ensure they're going to pay less in taxes. My financial fitness team has put together some materials that I know are going to help you. It's the Tax Savings Kit. Tax Savings Kit includes 3 things: free tax analysis, top 10 ways to pay less in taxes, and an investor's guide to taxes. Now, how do you get it? Simple. 866-764-2635. Again, 866-764-2635. I'm Mark Falter. This is Financial Fitness, making personal finance profitable.
on the Dr. Dahlia Show. Thank you all for tuning in. 1-877 Dr. Dahlia, 1-877 DOCDALI. Big thanks to Talk Media Network for making the show happen. Big thanks to Daniel, our producer, and big thanks to y'all for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter or X at Dr. Dahlia, Facebook, The Dr. Dahlia Show, and on YouTube. Click like and subscribe. So yesterday was the deadline where all hell was going to break loose on Iran, their bridges and power plants. And Iran responded by lining women and children up, holding flags as a sign of resistance, and which showed how they care about their citizens. Thinking, well, the U.S. won't bomb the bridges or the power plants. And I had thought, and I talked to you about how I think it is it was a decoy. Because, when you're about to attack and you're about to, although Trump is very unconventional about things like this, however, he does know how to distract and deter and use decoys when he tweets things out. So the media jumps on that like piranhas, and then he goes and gets something else done. But I was thinking to myself, you're making this announcement that you're going to, bomb the bridges and bomb even though it was very effective what they did when they bombed some of the bridges covertly and didn't tell them it was happening. And so what was the strategic psychological advantage? Well, is it that he wanted Iran to come to the negotiating table? Is it that he said, look, we have the ability to do it, we're going to do it, so you better get your butts to the negotiating table, you better come up with a plan, because this is going to happen. So it could have just been a very, loud threat, right? A big bark, but no bite. But it could, as I said, also be he wanted Iran to go and move all their resources to the bridges and power plants. Meanwhile, they know where some of the uranium enrichment is, or they know some of the other military bases and ammunition stores are. And so maybe they wanted to distract and deter while they could go in and attack other locations. But then last night I was thinking, right before the deadline, I'm like, Trump's not going to do it. Okay. I mean, he doesn't want to be, committed or accused of war crimes. He doesn't want women and children dying, even though it's Iran putting them in harm's way. Hamas did the same thing with hiding out in hospitals and schools and, using human shields. And so I'm like, something's going to happen so that Trump doesn't look like he did what Obama did, where here's the red line and then nobody crosses it. Because already people have been accusing Trump of making all these threats and then not acting on it. For those individuals who want the evil regime of Iran gone and Iranians free, and the threats in the Middle East and the terrorism and the support of Russia with the Ukraine war and all that to end, many people were hoping this would get done and the job would get finished. For others, they're like, let Iran be, let them do their thing. It's not hurting us. Whatever happens, happens. Although I'm not a part of that thinking, because Iran has been a thorn in our side and a brewing cancer, as I said, and this cancer has metastasized to multiple terrorist groups. We're still stuck in this Ukraine-Russia war, and Iran plays a big role in that. And it does need to be dealt with. It should have been dealt with. My issue is it should have been dealt with decades ago. But here Trump has a second term. He doesn't care what people think. He's like, I'm going to get this done. And so here we are with this peace plan. Pakistan has been mediating. And so Pakistan said, look, we got a plan. All right, there's a plan. Can we have a ceasefire? So moments before that deadline. Now, you wonder, was this planned? Did Trump say, look, did they know there was a ceasefire plan coming up, but they decided, let's, we got to make a move somehow. Was this advantageous for America? It probably was, because when you have Iran using human shields, again, I'm not exactly sure why they, Trump would have brought that up, calling it Power Plant Day and Bridge Day. But that's how he does things. But maybe he really wanted this peace plan. I don't think so, though, because when I look at the 10-point plan, it's kind of confusing. Okay, one is, withdrawal of U.S. forces from the region. Two is Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, they did allow some ships, but now I heard they've already started to halt some of the ships. I mean, we really don't want Iran in control of it. So I don't know if America really likes that, because then they could hold, America's oil, or the world's oil, hostage. Iran wants compensation for damages to Iran. America's not going to pay compensation. Iran wants removal of sanctions. They want release of frozen Iranian assets, Iranian commitment to not build nuclear weapons, acceptance of Iran's right to enrich uranium, Iran's agreement to peace treaties with regional countries, ceasing hostilities against all resistance groups and regions, and provisions backed by a UN resolution. So Iran's president said that the general principles desired by Iran have been accepted in the United States. In the meantime, Israel is like, okay, whoa. Hezbollah attacking Israel? No, that's not a part of the peace plan. We're not honoring that. Hezbollah is a terrorist group. We're dealing with them. And Israel has a right to defend themselves. So if Hezbollah and their terrorism, just like with Hamas, Iran can't sit here and say, well, we have to protect our terrorist proxies. Not going to happen. So a lot of people are looking at this going, wait a second. America agreed to this? I doubt it. America's not going to give Iran money. No way. No way. I mean, maybe if the Congress changes in the midterms, that maybe the Democratic-led Congress might offer reparations. But I just don't see Trump doing that as of now. And then now Pakistan's prime minister alleges that ceasefire violations have already happened. Apparently, they said that it was reported in a few places across the conflict zone, which undermines the spirit of the peace process. I earnestly and sincerely urge all parties to exist restraint. I think Saudi Arabia had intercepted a drone attack from Iran. I mean, why is Iran still? They want this ceasefire. The issue with ceasefires that I've seen, especially in the Middle East, is it gives the losing country time to regroup. And is that something that Trump wants? Is that good? I think what Trump and America needs is the Iran regime to be changed. We need peace in the Middle East, and we need the funding of terrorism to stop. And however that happens, it has to happen very quickly. The 2-week ceasefire does allow remobilization, and it does allow Iran to, work with whatever countries have offered to help him, whether it's North Korea or Russia or China, whatever, and allows a significant amount of time for them to regroup and reorganize. What is the benefit to America? Well, maybe it's because Trump made that red line, and now he has a chance to save face. I'm of the thinking that whatever we're seeing is not really what's going on. I think we have been fooled time and time again by what the media tells us, what White House tells us. It doesn't matter who the president is. And they're like, well, we got to make a statement. Let's do this. And then let's, in the background, do what we need to. And maybe, maybe there is a bigger, shall we say, goal or some other operation. Hearing that the General Kane wasn't that happy about the ceasefire, suggests that, it might be this might be a real plan. This might be something that's very valid. But then on the other end, if their media, shall we say, campaign, and we know that America, especially the CIA, and that was brilliant. I even suggested that the CIA, that America says we already got the soldier, we already got the downed pilot, and then hopefully Iran doesn't bring any resources to the area, and then or we found him over in this region so that America could go in and swoop in where he really is. So we know that we can play games too. And America can play games, and maybe that's what this is. This is a game. In the meantime, the stock market had been dropping, and so now the stock market is up because there's possibly an end to the war. The Straits of Hormuz active until now. We're being told that Iran has stopped some of the ships. The thing with any ceasefire is when I heard there was a ceasefire for 2 weeks, I knew it wasn't going to last because Iran and what we saw with Hamas, I mean, anytime there was a quote unquote ceasefire, terrorists do not honor. They don't follow the rules. So my guess is there is a strategy, but I'm just hoping this ends and ends soon. 1-877 Doc Dolly, don't go away.
Looking for a gift that can actually help secure someone's future? It's Mark Falter's new book, Common Sense Income Strategies. It makes the perfect gift for that special someone in your life. Mark has helped thousands of hardworking Americans secure their financial future by using time-tested strategies that continue to create wealth, whether the market is up or down. Strategies that will make perfect sense once you take the time to read this powerful book. Common Sense Income Strategies brings to you what Mark has been teaching in person and talking about on the radio for decades. You've worked too long and too hard not to see the fruits of your labor. To learn how to receive your free copy, call 866-764-2635. That's 866-764-2635. Secure your future with Common Sense Income Strategies by Mark Falter. Again, to learn how to receive your free copy, call 866-764-2635. That's 866-764-2635.
And we are back. 1-877 Doc Dolly, 1-877-DOC-DALI. I got to tell you, the more we look at the fraud that's going on, I almost don't want to read the news. You know, seeing that there is, as I think J.D. Vance is now heading the anti-fraud task force. We are going to be hearing more and more of how our taxpayer dollars got wasted. We now have a Orange County man who has pled guilty to a scheme, according to KTLA 5 in Los Angeles, where he submitted $270 million in fraudulent claims to Medi-Cal. That's according to the Department of Justice. He is Paul Richard Randall, 66 years old, reportedly submitted the claims for expensive prescription drugs that weren't medically necessary and weren't provided to the recipients that were supposed to get them. Now, according to Assistant Attorney General Tyson Duva of Justice Department Criminal Division, the defendant was a repeat fraudster who caused Medi-Cal, which is a program designed to help those in need, to be billed over $270 million for expensive and medically unnecessary medications. He had co-conspirators allegedly Kyrolos McHale, 37 years old, Patricia Anderson, 58 years old, of West Hills. Kyrolos was from Moreno Valley. And apparently they, quote, took advantage of Medi-Cal's suspension of its requirement that healthcare providers obtain prior auth before providing certain healthcare services or medications as a condition of reimbursement. Medi-Cal suspended the prior auth step. Now, prior authorization is a pain in the ass. You as a patient, when this fraud happens, it hurts you over and over and over again. How many times have you needed your Ozempic for diabetes? My husband, for example, he has diabetes. It took over a year to get insurance to finally approve it for diabetes. Now, I got to tell you, man, his diabetes is a good control. In fact, he's now on Mounjaro. But it took a year for a diabetic to get the medication they needed, because the prior authorization process is so grueling sometimes and so restrictive. So Medi-Cal decides to suspend it temporarily, and then apparently people found that loophole and took advantage. There's a business they had called Monta Vista Pharmacy. Randall and his alleged co-conspirators reportedly billed Medi-Cal tens of millions of dollars per month dispensing high reimbursement, non-contracted generic drugs through the pharmacy. Some of them were supposed to treat pain. And they say these high-cost reimbursement medications would normally have required prior auth. But that was under Medi-Cal's old system. So now, and then I guess there was also kickbacks and all sorts of other things. And from May 2020 to April 23, Monte Vista billed Medi-Cal more than $269 million. And many of these were for 19 different drugs. This is and then they laundered their proceeds by, I guess, transferring them to other parties, and they did kickbacks, and then, so I guess the ringleader may face a statutory maximum sentence of 30 years in federal prison. But this is what kills me. Me as a physician, getting Medicare or Medicaid to pay us for valid, simple claims was like pulling teeth. And they wouldn't pay us on all our claims. 2 out of every 5. We rarely got paid for flu shots, and if we did, it was 12 cents. And then you see these other people able to make all this money. I don't understand it. You're doing the right thing. You're billing correctly. Medicare got better. Because what happened is a lot of doctors say, I don't take Medicare. I don't know if you guys remember, but in the late 2000s, I think it was around the time of Obamacare, many doctors said, I'm not going to deal with it now. I'm not going to deal with Medicare or Medicaid anymore. They're not paying. I'm taking losses. So we're just going to take private insurance, or we're going to, which a lot of doctors started to do, is go to cash pay or concierge. And now a lot of doctors still do take Medicare, and we need them to. God bless them for doing that. But CCMS saw that we lost a lot of physicians because they were like, they don't want, not to mention the threats of audits. So doctors were hearing that Medicare audited one of my friends who you have level 2 visits if a nurse sees a patient. Like, let's say you have a blood pressure recheck. The nurse sees examines a patient, does the blood pressure, gives the results to the doctor, and the doctor calls in a prescription. Those used to be like level 2s. Level 3s is where the doctor sees you, but it's a very kind of simple 15-minute visit, 10, 15-minute visits for high blood pressure or diabetes. Level 4 is where you have a much more extensive visit. And then level 5 is a very extreme, very comprehensive visit. And so one of the doctors I worked with had coded level 3s, for simple follow-ups. Let me see the tonsils. We did your surgery. Let me see how the ear tubes are doing. Let's, and evaluating them. And so it wasn't necessarily a level 4 or 5. So build it a 3, which was appropriate. When he got audited by Medicare, he said, these need to be level 2s. But he said, what are you talking about? I was the one in the room. There's proof. I was the one in the room. He goes, no, that's fine. It's just the amount of work you did in the level of documentation should just be a nurse visit. And so other doctors are hearing this going, how subjective is that? Where our exam and the work we're doing is not considered a level 2 or level 3, which is the basic, the lowest of the levels for a doctor in the room visit. And then when you fail an audit, I guess you got to pay a lot of money. Now, thank God I've never been audited or anything like that, because I've always kind of done everything as, I think he did everything by the book. But luckily for me, I made sure nobody was billing incorrectly. After that one biller tried to bill a pap smear on a man, I was like, come on. I made sure to oversee everything and make sure that it was all, everything was done correctly. But eventually, do I practice anymore? Did I close my practice? Yeah. You're not getting reimbursed. You're not getting paid. There's only so much you could do. So when you look at the amount of work that it takes for your ethical, legitimate medical providers to get paid by government insurance, and then you see people figure out loopholes, and that's really what it is. They find something in the computer or the AI or a loophole that just allows pay. And then they take advantage of that. And it's really frustrating to me. So now how does this affect you? Well, even if you don't live in California, you can bet your butt that as they're finding more of this fraud, prior auths are back. Your medical equipment, anything you need, is going to be going through even a more rigorous process because there's these idiots and son of a guns out there that have taken advantage of the system and now messed it up for everybody else. And it's frustrating because, generic medications, luckily the majority of them don't need, prior auths, but there's a lot of medications as it pertains to cancer or diabetes or severe high cholesterol or your blood pressure or your skin condition or psoriasis or Crohn's where you need authorization. And what really, really stinks is the authorizations need to be redone. And if somebody doesn't follow all the steps needed, you don't get your medication. And if you don't get your medication, now you're going to get sick again. It's pretty scary. But we're in the situation because we can't afford the medications to treat some of these diseases that used to kill us. God bless the pharmaceutical companies for coming up with medications that now can extend our life. Problem is those medications can be pretty expensive. Does Ozempic need to be $1,200 a month? No. Takes about only $5-6 to make a month. But there's got to be a fine balance between appropriate profit and ROI and what patients have to pay. But these fraudsters are really screwing it up for everybody. 1-877-Doc-Dolly.
Hey guys, it's Clyde. We've had a lot of requests for Ground Zero merchandise, so we put together an online store with a big variety of high-quality items. I'm really excited to let you know about these things. We have a lot to offer you and your loved ones. In addition to our regular apparel, such as t-shirts, beanies, hoodies, and hats, we've expanded our product line with posters, flags, aprons, mugs, and a whole lot more. We also have Ground Zero collectibles along with a limited edition of items like a Clyde Lewis canvas portrait, a Ground Zero embroidered jacket that will certainly make for great gifts and for interesting conversations with family and friends. And we now offer publications such as Ron Patton's book about mind control, MK Zine, and back copies of the official magazine of Ground Zero while it was in print. Paranoia, the Conspiracy Reader, also coming in 2023, are updated and revised books that I've written. There's a secure and easy-to-use shopping cart for your purchases. So shop today at our official store by going to groundzeromerch.com. Again, that's groundzeromerch.com.
Dr. Dahlia here. Are you tired, burned out, gaining weight, succumbing to the daily pressures of life? Well, how's your dopamine doing? How you feel right now, how you'll feel an hour from now, and how you'll feel next week is completely reliant on your dopamine. Our daily motivation and willingness to push through challenges depends on the intricate chemical process dopamine provides. Christian Kalikas and I created Deploying Dopamine, a book that tells you what dopamine is, when it dysfunctions, and how to successfully deploy it when needed. Find Deploying Dopamine on Amazon today. Check it out.
Carl Amari here to tell you about our newest website for old-time radio lovers. It's 100radioshows.com. At this site, there are 5 old-time radio shows waiting for you to download free as our gift to you, and be sure to browse the additional 700 old-time radio shows available to you for 70% off by using the promo code RADIO at checkout. This is a limited-time offer, so log on to 100radioshows.com. That's 100radioshows.com.
We are back on the Dr. Dahlia Show. Thank you all for tuning in. 1-877-Doc-Dolly, 1-877-DOC-DALI. So years ago when I was a kid, we were walking through one of these restaurants. I don't think it was Red Lobster, but it was a restaurant. And you saw like the live lobster. And but we didn't order lobster. We couldn't afford it, and we don't really eat lobster in my family. But I remember somebody told me, and I was a kid at the time, that when they cook lobster, they throw the lobster alive. Well, I think because I made a comment as a kid going, they're alive. So that means they have to kill the lobster to eat it. I mean, I knew they had to kill our chicken or, the calf or the cow to get our food. But I didn't think that in a restaurant you would see the live animal prior, because you saw like the food server grab, somebody would choose the lobster they wanted to eat, and then the waiter would grab it, and you're like, so now that lobster is going to die. How did they kill the lobster? So I think it might have been the question I had posed. And somebody had responded, I forget who, that, well, they throw it in the boiling pot. I go, alive? And they go, yeah, and you could hear the screaming. The lobster will scream. Okay, so I was terrified by that. And now, no, the lobster doesn't scream, because it doesn't have vocal cords, but the lobster feels it. And so at first I thought they were lying. And then as I grew older, I was like, okay, they really do throw live animals, live crustaceans, cephalopods, octopi, in boiling water. I go, well, they could feel that. I mean, a high school biology could teach you that. And I'm like, they're not going to kill them first? No, that's the way they've always done it. They can't feel it. Yes, they can feel it. In fact, the lobster could be alive for up to 3 minutes in that boiling water before it dies. Now I feel bad. I like lobsters. I like fishies. I like octopus. Although octopi, they could be really rough sons of guns. You got to be really, really careful of an octopus, because it'll crawl out of its aquarium and go to others and eat the fish and crawl back. It doesn't care about going out into the land and part of the world and do what it has to do. They're pretty wily. But when you throw a live seafood into boiling water, they could survive for a long time. So what is the lobster screaming? Lobsters don't have vocal cords. It's supposed to be the steam escaping the shell, and also some of the air, I guess, that's created by the boiling organs. It's not pretty barbaric. And I guess now restaurants in England are being banned from killing lobster and cooking them and other animals, not only crustaceans but cephalopods, and that way. Why did they do that? Why of all the animals did they decide that we're going to just take boiling water and just throw the fish in it or the seafood in it? Well, because apparently, as we've talked about before, many forms of seafood can be poisonous. And so rather than letting it die first and then storing it in the bacteria, they felt that the freshest way to make fresh is to, cook it while it's alive. I think it's barbaric. I think there are better ways to do it. And I guess now in England, there's going to be a change in the UK government now recognizes certain invertebrates as sentient beings. And so in November 2021, lobsters, octopi, and crabs were formally included under the Animal Welfare Sentence Framework, requiring policymakers to consider their welfare in future decisions. Many England ministers, they call them, public officials, have made clear that live boiling is not considered an acceptable killing method, and that guidance will be updated. So I looked up, how do you kill a lobster painlessly? Now, interestingly, the laws of kashrut, because people will ask me, Dr. Dahlia, what is kosher meat? Well, it's more expensive, but why? Well, a rabbi blesses it, but also because they kill the animal as painlessly as possible. Well, how do they do that? So for kosher meat, the cow, rather than sitting there and then being slaughtered, they bring the cow up and let the blood rush. They invert the cow upside down, let the blood rush to his head, and then they cut the jugular. And apparently they found that to be one of the more painless ways to kill cattle. And so there's rules in kashrut and for kosher food that the animal had to have been with the utmost respect and with such responsibility and empathy and appreciation for trying to do it without hurting them, that those processes need to be followed in terms of kosher meat. So, with they're I think they're still going to feel to some degree, but a cutting of the jugular and you being inverted in the it's a more painless way for an animal to die. So for lobster, I don't know if I agree with this. They suggest to chill and stun it. According to Google AI, studies have shown, which I disagree with, to place the lobster in the freezer for about 20 minutes to an hour, or an ice saltwater slurry to induce a state of torpor, which numbs the animal and slows its metabolism. So rather than boiling an animal for a few minutes, they want you to freeze it for an hour and it's still alive. I don't know. I mean, I'm no animal rights expert, but that, or biologist, but that does not sound the most painless. The other way they say is you stun the lobster. You can, no, that's after you chill it. Then it's stunned. You mark an X on the top of the head behind the eyes, and then you position a sharp chef's knife at this spot, dive it firmly. Yeah, I don't know if I would freeze a lobster. Why can't you just very quickly hit it in the head? They say the most effective way is ikijime. Am I pronouncing that right? Or spiking. You hold the fish firmly, locate the brain, usually just behind above the eyes, swiftly insert a sharp spike or awl directly into the brain. If done correctly, the fish will convulse briefly and instantly go limp. You could do percussive stunning using a blunt instrument to deliver a single forceful blow to the head just above the eyes, but then there could be bleeding. You need to ensure the fish has died. There's also things that they say you could do where you could put them in water and put an anesthetist. You could put a medication, an anesthesia in the water where then the fish gets drugged and then, yeah. But they don't want your fish to suffocate in air. So like when you go fishing, it's interesting. When we go fishing, I don't like to see the fish flop around in the air and suffer. I like to immediately address it so it's painless. And I don't fish anything I won't eat. If not, I'll throw it back. And still, I don't like to have hook damage and other things in the fish. So I'll only fish for something that I know I'm going to eat, like salmon or halibut or something like that. I have to admit, barracuda fishing was fun. But if I'm not going to eat barracuda, then I probably are not going to fish for that again. And I respect animals. I love animals, and they do feel pain. I have to advise parents or patients who have pets to always be aware of their pets being in pain. Their pet is not going to go owie. They're going to be quiet. They're going to become less extroverted. They're going to introvert. They're going to start to kind of hide. That's a sign of pain. For any of you guys that have ever had a lab, we had a yellow lab, and the yellow lab always seemed happy with tail wagging and all that. But Apollo had hip dysplasia, and we really think that the hips were hurting him. And the vet said, yeah, he's in pain. You got to treat the pain. 1-877 Doc Dolly, don't go away.
Looking for an easy read that can actually help secure someone's future? Pick up a copy of Mark Falter's book, Common Sense Income Strategies. For the past 30-plus years, Mark has helped thousands of hardworking Americans secure their financial future by using strategies that continue to create wealth, whether the market is up or down. Strategies that will make perfect sense once you take the time to read this powerful book. Common Sense Income Strategies brings to you what Mark has been teaching in person and talking about on the radio for decades. It's not rocket science, it's a pretty easy read. You've worked too long and too hard not to see the fruits of your labor. Common Sense Income Strategies is available now on Amazon or by calling 866-764-2635. That's 866-764-2635. Common Sense Income Strategies by Financial Fitness Show host Mark Falter. Secure your financial future today.